Hello, welcome back to my channel. In today's video, I'm going to be telling you all about the books that I've changed my mind about. This is a video idea that has been floating around in my head for the past couple of years, and I've been compiling kind of a running list of books that I just feel differently about now than I did when I initially read the book. Books that I either really loved at the time and now, upon further reflection, I don't like quite as much, or books that I really didn't like when I first read them, and now with a little bit of time away from the book, I can realize, you know what, that was actually pretty solid. So I have a list of 10 books here today that I'm going to talk to you about, books that, I've changed my mind about. Before I do that, I want to thank the sponsor of today's video and tell you a little bit about Skillshare. Skillshare is an online learning community with thousands of online classes that I was initially inspired to try because a lot of my friends have taken Skillshare classes and learned new skills as a result, and I was like, you know what, I think it's finally time for me to try it out for myself, and after having taken a couple of the classes, I have to say I don't think I'm ever going to stop. Last time I talked to y'all about Skillshare, I was trying to level up my photography skills, and that's something that I'm still trying to work towards. One of my first classes I ever took on Skillshare was the Fundamentals of DSLR class, and I learned so much about using the manual settings on my camera, but after I was finished with that class, I wanted to learn a little bit more about the skills that it takes to take really beautiful pictures outdoors, specifically in natural lighting. So the class that I decided to take most recently is Portrait Photography, Working with Natural Light by Benjamin Heath. I really like the way this class kind of assumes you have knowledge of working with a DSLR, so I'm not having to go back over those fundamentals I learned, but you get really valuable tips on how to shoot in natural lighting and how to edit that natural lighting in Lightroom so you get the best possible finished result. I also really liked this class in particular because it was really jam-packed in only a 40-minute package. And this picture right here is a result of the skills that I learned in this class. I'm obviously still a work in progress, but I'm really happy with how this turned out. But if you're not interested in photography, Skillshare again has thousands of classes that you can choose from. There's classes on gardening, online marketing, business, film, productivity, web development, anything you can think of, there's probably a Skillshare class on it. And now is the perfect time to invest in yourself and your own skills. With a Skillshare membership, you can engage in your hobbies and passions all year long. It's a perfect way to start and finally keep your New Year's resolutions to yourself. And this is the perfect gift because it's not about consumption, it's not about more clutter, it's about you. Make 2022 the year that you perfect a creative hobby, land a new career, or launch your business. The first 1,000 people to use the link in my description will get a 1-month free trial to test out for yourself. Thanks again to Skillshare for sponsoring this portion of today's video. Alright, now on to the list, the 10 books that I've changed my mind about. First up is the book that kind of inspired this video, Home Before Dark by Riley Sager. Now, right off the bat, I think that thrillers, honestly, are some of the easiest books to change your mind about, because I feel like a lot of your enjoyment of a thriller really hinges on the twists, and I feel like the more thrillers you read, the more that you start to understand what twists that you like and which ones that you think are a little bit cheap. And I think what I learned after reading this book is that not only do I buy into the hype a little too much sometimes, but I also don't really love books that include a supernatural element but have a twist or an ending or a reveal that is not also supernatural. This book is about Maggie, who has returned to a home that she spent 3 weeks in growing up. I was gonna say the home she grew up in. She didn't really grow up in it, but her father was a writer and he decided that he wanted to write about this spooky ghost house, so he takes his wife and his daughter, they go live in this house, and then they are basically haunted so much that they decide that they are going to leave this house 3 weeks later. Her dad writes this best-selling novel about this scary house, and now that Maggie is a full-grown adult, she wants to kind of go back to the scene of the crime, go back to that house, make it over, because that's her job now, I guess. She renovates homes, but while she's there, she also wants to kind of disprove this ghost story idea. It's kind of haunted her, I guess, growing up, and not in a fun way. She's always been annoyed by her dad's book, and so she decides she's gonna go and she is going to get to the bottom of it herself, and things don't go to plan. She gets kind of haunted in this house, and a lot of spooky stuff starts happening, and it was a lot of fun to read about, I will say. Very atmospheric, it definitely felt spooky. I loved the idea of a haunted house, but the thing that I didn't love about this book is that there are so many supernatural elements, and the ending of the book is not supernatural. There is this kind of seemingly random plot twist or whodunit kind of thing, or reveal. How about reveal? Let's go with that word. There's a big reveal at the very end of the book that feels too little too late, and again, it's not supernatural. And I know that these books are supposed to be grounded in real life, but it just feels unexciting when the build-up is so grand. Honestly, I think it would have been more satisfying for our heroine to just run away from this house just like her parents did back in the day. Kind of have an open ending, no answers really to what's going on in the house. I feel like that would have been more satisfying. And I feel like I was able to put that twist ending to the back of my mind until I read Survive the Night by the same author. And I feel like that's something that happens to me a surprising amount. I will read a book by an author. I'll not really know how to feel about it because maybe it's a new to me author or I just haven't read enough of their stuff, and then I'll read another book down the road, and it sort of makes me re-examine how I feel about that author's work as a whole. And I feel like that was really the case here. I really hated Survive the Night. It had another kind of like twist ending that was very much at the end of the story that didn't really go with the rest of the book, and it just leaves you feeling really unsatisfied. And it's like, if you can't end a thriller well, even if the lead up is really fun, it's just never going to satisfy me. It's never going to be a 5-star book. And I think I'm starting to realize that Riley Sager's books are maybe just not for me. I really liked Lock Every Door, which was the first book I read by him, but pretty much nothing else has been a 5-star from this author since then, and that's okay. So I'm not really sure how I would rate this book now. I rated it initially 4 stars, and I think now I'd probably give it like 2.5 or 3, but I don't really care to go back and reread it just to figure out what my new star rating would be. I think I'm pretty alright leaving things how they are. Next up, we have another book that I changed my mind about for the worse, I guess? The Simple Wild by K.A. Tucker. Now, to this book's credit, it is a really incredible new adult book. Notice I say new adult book and not new adult romance. I think this book does a fantastic job at handling issues that I think apply to a lot of new adult people. Trying to kind of figure out what you want out of your life after graduating, or after just becoming a full-fledged adult. You know, all the things that kind of go with that. Also dealing with grief and with loss and with maybe a little bit of trauma. I really liked our main character, Calla, at first. I really liked seeing how she grew over the course of the story. But my issue with this book really came from the romantic element of the book, sadly. The hero of this book essentially steals our main character's luggage when she is visiting her estranged father, I guess you could say, a dad she's never met in Alaska. She has to get on this teeny tiny little plane with this guy who treats her pretty poorly, and he ends up essentially like stealing her luggage and keeping it at his house because he doesn't believe that she needs all of that stuff. She's beautiful as she is, and she doesn't need makeup or pretty clothes. Initially, this kind of rubbed me the wrong way, but I don't think I fully let those feelings sink in until I was like kind of, again, removed from this book for a little bit. But it just left a little bit of a bad taste in my mouth. I think it's something that we're supposed to think is cute, funny, charming, whatever, but I found it controlling in a way that was a little bit of a red flag for me, which was frustrating because, again, I liked the other elements of the story, and it's like, I would love to recommend this book to, you know, maybe someone that's graduating from high school or graduating from college as something that could be, you know, an uplifting, like, good romance, but I also wouldn't want someone to believe that a man who does this kind of thing is, like, a good partner. And I'm not trying to say that I don't love controlling alpha heroes sometimes. I'm not trying to be an extremist and say this book is absolutely horrible in any sense. I just really didn't like the hero. I felt uncomfortable with some of the things that he did, and sure, he makes up for that later on, and I guess, you know, again, the intention is sweet there, but again, I wouldn't want someone that I love in terms of, like, you know, a female friend or a cousin or someone. I think that that's acceptable for a guy to do. And I guess for me too, this kind of leads to a broader question of like why this was the vehicle for the enemies to lovers thing. I think there could have been a lot of other like combative moments between Calla and, is it Jonah, that would have nothing to do with appearance. Like, there's definitely reasons why our hero is treating our heroine this way. I just wish that, again, like the way he would have executed his anger would have been a little bit different. Again, just a personal opinion here. I totally understand why people love this book. I don't hate it, but I think if I were going back and re-rating this book, I'd probably bump it down from like a 4-star read to like a 3-star read. Next, we have a book that I changed my mind about in a positive way, Filthy Gods by R. Scarlett. So I read Filthy Gods back in 2018, pretty shortly after the novella came out, and my initial feelings about this book were kind of tepid. It's a novella about a guy who is a part of a secret society at Yale, and we kind of get to know some of his friends at the beginning of the book. Not all of them, not in depth or anything, but there's sort of like small introductions into these characters who are going to be, I would say, the main characters or the heroes in the coming like full-length novels. But the relationship here, the sort of like crux of the story, I guess, is an enemies to lovers relationship between this guy, I think named Nathaniel, and his lady Juliet. Enemies to lovers, right? They have been rivals in the classroom, and she, I think, is going to work for his family in some capacity over the summer, whether that is at their family home or like a hotel or something that his family owns. Can't exactly remember the details, but I do know that this book was incredibly steamy. It had writing that I found pretty remarkable. I initially was like irritated at this book because it was only a novella, and I didn't really have any sort of great grace, I would say, that I put towards novellas. I just didn't really like novellas. I felt like they served absolutely no purpose and could not be a good vehicle for a full-fledged, swoon-worthy romantic relationship, right? And I still kind of stand by that. Like, I definitely don't think novellas are my favorite form of, you know, oh wow, this romance is gonna like blow me away kind of thing. Like, again, I think you need more page length for that, but I think I was a little harsh because I think this novella does a lot of things right. Firstly, I think it's really cool to publish a novella before a full-fledged book series where we kind of get hints at some characters who we might want to read more about. I love that when I read full-length novels, right? Like the first book in a romance series, you get to know some of the side characters and you're just like chomping at the bit to read their stories. I think this novella did a really good job in introducing some characters. I also, again, I liked the steamy scenes here, and the writing, it's remarkable in a way that I don't really think I can put my finger on, except for I think the prose really stands out here compared to a lot of other books that I've read on KU, which is not a slight to indie authors, because you know what? Indie books are my absolute favorite, but I do think this one really stood apart in that the writing was so good, the steamy scenes were so good. Again, it wasn't like the most swoon-worthy romance ever, but I just feel like in hindsight I was a little bit harsh on it. When I think about this book now, I'm like, I just want the full-length novels in this series. Our Scarlett, if you were watching, please, for all of us, write the series. We want the series. I think I initially gave this novella like 3 stars, but I think I'd probably give it 4 stars now. I definitely need to reread it soon. All right, maybe an unexpected pick here. A book that I know a lot of people really love, and so I hesitate to even like say that I don't love it as much anymore. The Hating Game by Sally Thorne. I read this book back in 2017, which for reference is before I started my YouTube channel and before I was reading at the large volume that I read now. And at the time, I remember thinking this book was unexpectedly hot. I really appreciated the elevator scene, and honestly, I think this was just one of the first like contemporary adult romances that I'd read. Up until that point, I think I'd pretty much only read like paranormal or fantasy romance, so this was, and it was like one of the first contemporaries I'd ever read, and I was like, this is kind of hot. And honestly, I still think that the elevator scene is top tier. I still think this book laid the groundwork in a lot of ways for a lot of modern contemporary romances, and especially a lot of like modern enemies to lovers relationships. When I revisited this book in 2020, sadly, I was a little bit underwhelmed. Now, the most glaring issue for me, the one that kind of made me start rethinking my feelings on this book in the first place, was the kind of egregiously bad language usage here. I understand that our heroine dealt with a lot of people who were mean to her or who kind of looked down on her in the story, but I feel like the way that she addressed people internally, the words and the language that she used towards them, or even like in dialogue, like you could tell that the author was trying to be funny, but it was words that I found offensive and that a lot of people would personally find offensive. And this book was not written long enough ago to be able to say like, oh, times have changed. Like, it was 2017. It's not that long ago. Like, why are you using some of these word choices? Again, it's like, there are other ways to be funny. There are other ways to insult people, honestly. And as I kind of mentioned a second ago, I just feel like this book doesn't really stand out amongst the sea of contemporary romances that I've read lately. I don't think this book is bad, and again, it is kind of a trendsetter in a way, but when I actually sit down and think about what the story is about, who these people are, I don't really feel any sort of strong attachment to them. Lucy, the only thing we really know about her is that she likes the Smurfs and that her parents own a strawberry farm. We don't really know that much about her desires and her wishes for the future. We don't really get a good feel for who she is as a person. In my opinion, she doesn't feel very fully fleshed out, except for being, again, like pint size. And then we have Josh, and again, it's like the only thing that he really has going for him, the only thing that he really has is his childhood trauma that comes into play in the book. Like, his parents are not the best, and his dad especially is like disappointed that he's not a doctor, and I get that, but I wanted more from him. I feel like I've read other books that they don't spend like tons of time, I would say, giving you backstory on characters, but I still get a better feel for who they are. I feel like this book in general, it's generic. I'm gonna say it's generic. And again, in exploring some of my changing tastes, I've also realized I just don't personally really love office workplace romances. It's just not something that I think really lends itself well to like an original story, and I honestly can't think of any workplace romance I've given 5 stars to that takes place in a traditional office setting, especially. So I think initially I gave this book like 5 stars, and in hindsight I think I would give it 3. Not a bad book. I absolutely adore the movie with Lucy Hale, so that is like one good thing to come out of this, I guess. It's not a favorite for me anymore, and that's okay. Next up we have Good Gone Bad by Gianna Darling. This is one that feels a little dramatic to put on this list because I don't think that the bump down in star rating is really like all that dramatic, but when I first read this book, I really enjoyed it. It followed that same familiar formula that Gianna Darling does, which is like a taboo age gap relationship. It is about Officer Danner and Harley Rose, and this one is, I would say, one of the more tame taboo relationships in that when they get together, Harley Rose is like 25, and I think Officer Danner's in his 30s, so he's not like a 50-year-old man with a 25-year-old girl, but I think because the age gap was a little less extreme in this book, Gianna Darling attempts to make things a little bit more taboo in that Officer Danner really likes using his handcuffs in situations that are not arrest situations, if you catch my drift, which, you know, it makes for like a slightly more interesting and exciting time. And again, when I first read this book, I was like totally down for that, and I did think this one felt really original. But when I reread this book recently, especially reading it back to back with the first 2 books, and then continuing on with the series for the latter half of this year, I've read the last 3 books in the series, I realized they all just really feel the same. I respect an author who caters to an audience. I understand that some authors have a formula that they want to stick to that works well for them, this is the kind of book they want to write, more power to you. As a reader, I just feel like it gets less exciting the more that this same trope is written time and time again. I really still love book two. Book two is definitely my favorite of all of them, but I just feel like all the books kind of run together after a while, and I'm less impressed by this like taboo age gap relationship thing. Don't get me wrong, I love a good motorcycle club romance, but it has me kind of wanting to branch out and read from a different author in this particular subgenre. And it's not a subgenre that I feel like I read a ton from, but now I don't really feel like I can go to Gianna Darling for like the most unique and original motorcycle club romances, you know. She does have another one coming out, hopefully sometime next year. Maybe that one will feel completely different from the synopsis that I saw online. I don't think it will. I'm willing to give it a chance. I just think in the future I probably won't buy the paperback. I will probably read it on Kindle Unlimited and then assess my feelings from there. So again, it feels a little dramatic to put that book on this list, but I think it has just kind of overall changed my feelings on this author's work in general. This went from like a 4 or 5 star read to like a 3-star read for me. Next up, we have another thriller because again, they're just so easy to change your mind about. Turn of the Key by Ruth Ware. Now, this is a book that I initially read for my first taste test video back in 2019 when I read Books Lala, Kayla's favorite books. It was, I would say, a pretty pivotal moment here on my channel. I feel like so much changed from there and I had so much fun making that video. And I think my excitement maybe for like the video idea sort of colored my judgment on some of the books. I read The Turn of the Key, and I will say, to this book's credit again, it was exciting in that there was a lot going on. This book follows our main character. She is a nanny. I think her name is Rowan or something like that. And she is currently in jail. She's speaking to us in, I think, letter format that she's writing to her attorney saying, hey, I did not kill one of the girls that I was watching. I'm going to tell you like what went down at this house. And so we get to see kind of in the past what happened in this home that she was nannying 2 little girls in, like what went down. The house that she was nannying in was a smart home, and the house kind of started acting up. And she worked there, you know, like lights would flicker on at random times or alarms would go off at random times. The little girls were terrors. She also has some secrets that she's keeping to herself, our narrator that is. And so as the story unfolds, we're like, who's the culprit here? Like, how could any of this lead to this little girl's death? And we get this reveal at the end of the story. Not gonna lie, again, it was the same issue that I had with that Riley Sager book that I talked about first. There were so many things pointing towards like, I don't know, kind of like a supernatural element, or like, I don't know, the house had a mind of its own or just something. And then the ending just felt so lackluster by comparison. It's like, here, we're leading you to believe something, and then the ending comes and you're like, I didn't see that coming at all. Where did that come from? I don't like those kind of endings. I know some people totally do and totally think that's awesome, and you know, more power to you. Like, that's just not my kind of twist. I think I just generally prefer a mystery that leaves little breadcrumbs. Like, that's what I'm into, and this book didn't have that. There is something to be said about that, like, the simplest explanation is often the right one, and I feel like that is kind of the case here, but it just didn't make for like a satisfying read for me. And I think I mentioned some of these misgivings that I had when I made that video. I feel like I still came to like a 4-star reading for it, but with some time away, I think honestly this would be more of like a 2 or 3-star read. It was like fun enough. It wasn't a boring thriller, but I really wanted the ending to be different. All right, next up we have a series of books. This is not the first series of books I'm going to be talking about. I have like 2 series on this list that I have changed my feelings about. One for the better, one for the worse. I'm going to go with the worse one first, and that is the Like Us series by the Ritchie sisters, Krista and Becca, who wrote the Addicted series, the Calloway Sisters series, and this series is a spin-off of both of those. It follows the children of the Calloway sisters and their sort of romantic exploits, and I was really excited about this series, especially the first 3 books, because it was going to follow a queer relationship, which Krista and Becca had not written up until this point. And I was like, this is cool, this is a cool twist. I'm really excited to see how they do different things kind of with this new generation of characters. I was just ultimately left kind of disappointed. When I read the first book, I like went back and looked at my Goodreads review. I actually did have some like initial feelings about it. I kept reading and I really liked, I guess, the wrap up of that like initial trilogy of the greater series, because I was like, oh, it's like so romantic and so sweet. But like, when I go back and think about it, I think my feelings have changed. Like, I just don't feel the same way anymore. I think my 2 biggest issues with this series, or with this like the first 3 books is really what I'm talking about, is that I feel like they lacked any real tension. So the first 3 books follow Moffy, who is the son of, I want to say, like the characters from the Addicted series, and he is, I think, the eldest of all of the children, and he ends up falling for his bodyguard Pharaoh. And I guess you could say that this is a forbidden relationship because, you know, one's a bodyguard and one's not. There's like a tiny age gap that like, you know, is a little bit scandalous or whatever. It's not scandalous, they're both consenting adults. But I was like, where's the tension here? Like, the authors wanted you to believe that this was the tension here, that like there is a little bit of an age gap. He is a bodyguard and like no one can know that they're together. And I was just like, why? There's literally no reason why these 2 shouldn't be together. And frankly, they didn't seem to care either, the characters, because they get together like very early on in the first book. And there's 2 other books. What? There just doesn't really need to be multiple books about the same characters, in my opinion, for a romance. Now, I am not saying I don't love slice of life moments. It's not that I don't want to see my characters happy. I love that stuff. In fact, give me an extended epilogue any day. I just feel like having 3 books about the same characters feels redundant, and I didn't really feel like I saw a ton of growth in the characters over that 3-book span. The second thing, this is something that I pointed out in my initial Goodreads review, is that I feel like the steamy scenes here are not great. I remember distinctly Moffy narrating one of the steamy scenes, and he draws attention to his own physical features in the act. My rippling abs flexed. My piercing green eyes sparkled when I looked into his eyes. It felt very weird. It pulled me out of the story, and it got me kind of thinking about if this was the kind of queer story I wanted to read, or the kind of queer books that I wanted to support. Now, I will say, and I think a lot of the book community as a whole, has really changed our tune when it comes to own voices stories. I think a lot of us have become less militant about that, which is great, because I don't think that people should be forced to come out to be able to write books to reflect their experiences or their desires. Like, I think that's totally valid. Like, you should be able to do and write, I think, what you want. That being said, I do feel like I would have preferred if this would have been written by a man. Yeah, upon reflection, I'm just like, I don't know that this is like, I think this would have been written differently. I think the story could have been approached differently had it been written by someone who had had these experiences. Anyway, I think that Chris and Becca really have their thing down. I think that they write really fun books, but from what I've heard from a lot of reviewers, the series kind of goes downhill and goes in like weird directions. And when I, again, reflect on the 3 first books in the series, the ones that people actually tend to really enjoy, I just realized that like this maybe is not my favorite series ever, and that I'm not sure that I really have an interest in continuing on with the series. I think I read like 1 book after that initial trilogy, and then I was like, I don't know about this. So yeah, I think in hindsight, the series, it's just not for me. It's a not for me series. I don't know what I would rate all of these books, probably like 2 or 3 stars, just kind of All right, last negative review that we have, Angry God by LJ Shen. So initially when I rated this book, I gave it 4 stars because, I'll be honest, after a string of like kind of disappointing LJ Shen books, I felt like this was a return to form. It felt like classic LJ with that sort of like enemies to lovers, damaged hero thing. And so I was willing to kind of overlook some of the issues that I had. It's funny because in my review, again, I have some of the things that made this book not perfect for me, but I guess I was just, again, willing to overlook those because I was like, finally some good food. It wasn't the best food. Like, I'll put it that way. This book is about Vaughn, who is the son of Vicious from the book Vicious. I don't remember what the name of that series is, but the one that has Vicious as like the first book, the series of like the best friends, they have children, and then, you know, it's the All Saints High series or something like that. Anyway, the son of Vicious ends up in a relationship with Lenora. They end up going to, I want to say this like conservatory or something in London, and they are competing for a spot or something like that. And so it's kind of an enemies to lovers thing, and Vaughn is this like very damaged hero because of some things that have happened to him in his past. And it definitely has some like unconventional steamy times, which, you know, makes it a little bit different than Vicious's book, which is, I guess, fun. I don't know. In hindsight, obviously, I had a couple issues with this book. Number 1, this book lacked originality, which is something that I called out whenever I reviewed it initially. The plot is not identical to Vicious in any sense. Again, it's like, it's in a different country. It follows a different, I would say, sort of flow, but the relationship between Vaughn and Lenora feels very similar to the relationship between Vicious and, I can't remember the heroine's name in that book, to be honest. We have trauma as well for the hero. Vaughn and Vicious both have their own childhood trauma that they're kind of dealing with. And that kind of leads me into the second thing that I didn't love about this book, and it is that I don't really like spin-off series where it is the children of, you know, characters that we have loved before, because no matter how you are going to put trauma on a character, no matter how Vaughn comes about the trauma that he experiences, you're always going to kind of wonder like where the parents were. At least I kind of did. And not even necessarily in this book, but in kind of the other books in the series as well. You're kind of like, okay, I really liked this hero and heroine. Now you're telling me that their daughter is like really emotionally messed up because the mom was neglectful. It just feels a little bit weird. Like, you grow to love these characters and then they have kids that they're terrible to. It doesn't really work out very well, and it definitely makes you feel differently about characters you used to love, and I just don't like that. I think there are different ways to write spin-off series. I wish maybe that this had just been a series about characters that go to the same school that those boys did, that don't have anything to do with the original series. Make them really good parents, make them really involved. That's something that I think Penelope Douglas does really well. I read Falls Boys this year, and she has the parents kind of at the forefront of the story. They're very involved in their children's lives, and it doesn't seem like the kids have like this horrible trauma or like neglectful parents. And you know, obviously, like, nobody's perfect, and I don't expect the parents in these books to be perfect, but I don't know, it's just weird choices all around. I don't know what I would rate this book. I don't really want to reread it to kind of like figure that out, but I think probably like a 2 or 3 star read would be kind of appropriate. That's how I felt about the other books in this series. I think I only read the first 3. I think there might be a 4th one, but regardless, I gave the first 2 like 2 stars, and this one I think probably kind of goes along with that. And lastly, let's end off on a high note with the Bridgerton series by Julia Quinn. I ended up reading The Duke and I want to say back in 2019. It was one of the first historical romances I had ever read. I initially really had a bad taste in my mouth about it, shall we say. I think there is a pretty infamous scene in that book that a lot of people are not okay with, but because of the way that the author frames the assault that happens, some people are willing to overlook it, and some people don't hate the book as a result, and that's fine. I personally, it really made the enjoyment of the book like disappear for me. I loved that first beginning of the book. I thought this was something different, this is fun, and then that scene happened and it just ruined things for me, right? And I stand by that, right? That has not changed. The first book is still like not it in my eyes. Then I heard that a show was going to be made, and I was like curious that maybe some of the other books in the series were going to be good, and a lot of people in the comments of that video where I initially read The Duke and I said like, you know, you need to read the other books, like they're better. And so I picked some of them up, and I think I read like the first 3 or 4 books before the show came out, and I just didn't really love them. I just thought that they were kind of mediocre. I didn't feel like the romances were particularly swoon-worthy. I felt like Julia Quinn really drew out her third act conflicts in a way that I felt was undeserved, unearned, just overly dramatic and tension-filled, and I like tension, so that's saying something. The more time that I spent reading the books in the series, I think I only have one left. It's like The Little Boys at Gregory. I haven't read his book. I've read everybody else's book at this point. Started really becoming attached to the series. I think part of that probably is the show, which I actually do think is better than the book series, but I just feel like you grow to love the characters in these books, even if you don't love the romances. I think the heroes kind of suck, but I really love the family as a whole, and I do think that Julia Quinn has just this undeniable talent for writing. Again, maybe her romances aren't perfect for me, but I think that she is obviously good at something, because there are so many historical romance series out there that have not gotten the attention that the Bridgerton series has. I can understand why. I really do think that there's something special here, even if I can't really like put my finger on why. I just think that these books are fun. I think they're fun. I love listening to the audiobooks that are narrated by Rosalind Landor, and I think if you are tempted to read them, I'd say go ahead and do it. Obviously, know what you're getting into reading that first book, but I think they're a fun time. Again, it's like, I'm not going to put any of these on like my most swoon-worthy amazing romances with like book boyfriend heroes, but I just like the books, okay? I like the books. I think they're fun, and I think that I was kind of being a little contrary any other time that I've talked about these books, and I wanted to set the record straight that, you know what, I don't hate them. I think they're fun. I don't think they're perfect, but they're fun, and I think you should give them a try if you were at all interested in them. That is it. Those are all of the books currently that I have changed my mind about. I'm sure there are other books that I haven't thought of to add to this list. Let me know if you'd like a part 2 in the future. Books that I've changed my mind on. I see a lot of romances in the future that I will probably change my mind on. I'm definitely like too generous sometimes, and then also like too harsh at times, because you know what? I'm human and you're human, and I love that, you know, our opinions do change over time. I think that's something that I've realized being on the internet for a while, is that sometimes people expect your opinions to stay the same and to stay stagnant, and that none of your opinions can like conflict each other ever. But you know what? They very much can. We're complex individuals, and our opinions are constantly changing. So hopefully this showed you that a little bit. I love y'all so much. Thanks so much for watching this video, and until next time.